Okay, we are going to discuss adding and subtracting fractions. This is a skill that many people still suffer through and really don't know how to do. At this point, as you're entering into higher math, you really have to master this skill, and it has to become automatic. You're going to be working with fractions, doing more interesting things with them, so you can't be bogged down by the adding and subtracting. And you also can't just convert them to decimals. Decimals, in many cases, as you go along the algebra path, are not going to help you. You need to be able to work with fractions. You need to get over that fear of fractions. So let's do that now. Let's review the process for adding and subtracting. So here is a problem, 1/2 plus 1/3, and I want to figure out what that is. Very common response I get, well, that's 2/5. I add the numerators, 1 plus 1 to get 2, and then I add the denominators, 2 plus 3, and I get 5. So 1/2 plus 1/3, 2/5. Well, unfortunately, that is not correct. And let's look at a picture to help us figure out what's going on here. So what I've done here is I've taken 1/2 of a whole. You can think of it as 1/2 of a pie, if you'd like. And that's my green piece. I've also taken 1/3 of a whole circle. That's my yellow piece. And I've kind of put them together. So I can see that 1/2 on 1 plus 1/3, it's less than a whole, but it may be a little hard to see now by how much. Now, on the other hand, let's look at 2/5. Each one of these blue slices represents a fifth, and I've got 2 of them here. Well, clearly, 1/2 plus 1/3 is not the same thing as 2/5. So 1/2 plus 1/3 is not 2/5. But let's look at the process then. How do we determine what 1/2 plus 1/3 is? Okay, so here I've got my picture again, and it's a little bit hard to see. Well, what fraction is that? What piece of a whole is that? So I'm going to do something here. I am going to take these pieces, and I'm going to further divide them up into equivalent pieces. So I'm going to take this piece, my half, and divide it into sixths. And 3 of these sixths make up that half. Same thing with the 1/3. That's the same as having 2 of these 1/6 pieces. So now I can see my same shape, but they're equivalent pieces, and all I have to do is count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5/6. So what is 1/2 plus 1/3? Well, it's 5/6. I can see that. So now the question is, how do I do this using math instead of having to draw a picture every single time? Well, first thing you want to do is you want to rewrite the fractions using a common denominator. So 2 and 3 are not common. Common means the same. So I need to find them. And you can find the least common denominator, meaning the smallest denominator I can find, by finding the least common multiple. Well, what are multiples of 2? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. What are multiples of 3? 3, 6, 9, 12. And my least common multiple is 6. That's my least common denominator. I can always find a common denominator, not necessarily the least one, but at least a common one, by just multiplying the 2 of them. 2 times 3. So if you are unsure what denominator to use, you can always just multiply them. 2 times 3 is 6. It's a common denominator. And in this case, it happens to be the least common denominator. That's what I'm going to use. So once I know that I want these to be in terms of sixths, I am going to convert 1/2 to be described as something in terms of sixths, as well as 1/3 in terms of something that's sixths. So let's start with the 1/2. If we remember the process, I want to be sixths. Well, 2 times what gives me 6? 2 times 3 gives me 6. Well, if I multiply the denominator by 3, I have to multiply the numerator by the same number, 3, to get an equivalent fraction. So 1 times 3 is 3. So 1/2 is the same as 3/6. And I can see that in my picture. Right? Here's my half, and it's 3/6. I want to do the same thing with my 1/3. 3 times what gives me 6? Well, 3 times 2 gives me 6. I multiplied the denominator by 2. I want to multiply my numerator by 2. 1 times 2 is 2, 2/6. And again, I can also see that up here, 2/6. Once I have my fractions rewritten with a common denominator, I just add my numerators and keep the same denominator. So I'm going to rewrite 1/2 plus 1/3 using their equivalent fractions. 3/6 plus 2/6. Now I have a common, or the same, denominator. I just add my numerator. 3 plus 2 is 5, and I keep that same denominator, 5/6, which is what I saw with the picture. If I want to subtract fractions, What if I had 1/2 minus 1/3? Well, here's a half, and here is a third. This is what I'm going to be removing. So what am I going to be left with? This little piece here, and I brought it out here. So it's this little piece is what is my result. And what is that little piece? Well, 1, 2, 3, 6. This is a sixth. So I know what my answer needs to be. How do I get at you doing math? Process is almost identical as when we were adding. We're going to rewrite the fraction using a common denominator. We've already done this. 1/2 is the same as 3/6, and 1/3 is the same as 2/6, because we've already figured out the least common denominator of 2 and 3 is 6. And now instead of adding them, I'm just going to subtract those numerators and keeping the same denominator. So instead of writing 1/2 minus 1/3, I'm going to write 3/6 minus 2/6, equivalent fractions. And then I subtract my numerators to get 1, and I keep my denominator to get 6. So there we go, and that's how we get our 6. It can be a little more confusing if you're looking at mixed numbers. So let's say I want to add 1/2 plus 2 1/3. So I've drawn some pictures here. I've got 1 1/2, and now I've got 2 1/3. I kind of see what's going on here. How many holes am I going to have? 1, 2, 3 holes. And then I've got that 1/2 plus 1/3. Well, I kind of already know how to do that. I just added those before, and it was 5, 6. So it looks like our answer is going to be 3 and 5, 6, just looking at the picture. So that's one way to deal with this. Add the fractional parts, the 1/2 and the 1/3, to get 5, 6, and then I add my whole parts. So let's look here. Now this looks a little complicated, but let's take it a step at a side. Here's my original thing I'm adding, 1 1/2 plus 2 1/3. Now I'd like to remember, when you have 1 1/2, that's the same as having 1 plus a half. 2 1/3 is the same as having 2 plus a third. So all I did is I rewrote this. I'm like, let's put the whole numbers together, the 1 plus the 2, and let's put the fractions together, the 1/2 plus the 1/3. Now I know what 1 plus 2 is, that's 3. I've got 1/2 plus 1/3. Now we just went through this exercise, so just to kind of review it, I looked at what's my common denominator. Well, that's going to be 6. I'm going to rewrite 1/2 as 3/6 and 1/3 as 2/6. Now I can add these together. 3 plus 2 is 5, 6. I get 3 plus 5, 6, which is the same as 3 and 5, 6. Okay? Now some people really enjoy doing it this way. They can see it really well. They like it. But there could be a little bit of a complication. Sometimes the fractional pieces will add up to an improper fraction. What if we had gotten 8/6 over here? Then you need to know to kind of take 6/6 away and make it 4 and 2/6, reduce. It gets a little bit complicated for some people, and they don't like that part. They're not comfortable with it. An alternative way to do this is to convert the mixed number to improper fractions and then find the common denominator and add as we did this before. So let's look at that. So again, I'm starting with 1/2, 1 and 1/2 plus 2 1/3. Now, do we recall how to change a mixed number into an improper fraction? I have 1 whole and a half of a whole. That's like having 2 halves, plus 1/2 is 3 halves. But the shortcut was you multiply the denominator by your whole number, 2 times 1, and you add the numerator piece to get 3, all over the same denominator. So 1 1/2 is the same as 3 halves. 2 1/3, you say 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. All over 3 is 7/3. So I've rewritten my mixed numbers as improper fractions. And now again, find that common denominator. We've worked with 2 and 3 to know it's 6. 2 times what gives me 6? 2 times 3. Well, if I multiply my denominator by 3, then I multiply my numerator times 3. 3 times 3, 9. So 3 halves is the same as 9/6. Do the same thing with 7/3. 3 times 2 gives me 6, so I need to multiply my numerator by 2 as well. 7 times 2 is 14. Now I have my common denominators. 9 plus 14 is 23. I have 23/6. I want to now bring it back down to the mixed numbers, because that's what I started with. If you recall, the way we find that is we divide, because fractions are just division. 23 divided by 6. Well, it goes into that 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18. And how many do I have left over? Well, 23 minus 18 is 5. So I have 3 and 5, 6. Get the same answer either way. So you pick your favorite way. You might want to experiment a little doing it both ways when you practice to see which one you actually prefer. I just want to do one more looking at a subtraction problem. Here I've got 2 1/3, and I've got a picture of 2 1/3, minus 1 1/2. So if I'm taking things away, I'm going to see this one disappear because I'm taking away 1, and I'm also going to take away half. So kind of half of this one kind of going to go away. So what does that really look like? What I'm going to be left with is this half of a piece and this third of a piece, which I'm putting here, a half and a third. And again, that's kind of been the pattern we've been repeating all along. A half and a third is 5/6. So what's the correct response to 2 1/3 minus 1 1/2? Well, it's 5/6. And I can see that through my pictures. But let's look at this through math. So there, again, two ways to deal with it. Kind of look at the whole parts, look at the fractional parts. The trick here is sometimes you have to borrow, and then let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so first let's just look at this part here. I like writing these up and down. For me, it's a little bit easier to see. I've got 2 1/3 minus 1 1/2. Well, again, not common denominators. I need to make them common denominators. We've already done this before. 1/3 is the same as 2/6. 3 times 2 is 6, so 1 times 2 is 2. So I'm going to rewrite 2 1/3 as 2 2/6. 1 1/2 I'm going to rewrite as 1 3/6 because 1/2 is the same as 3/6. Now if I go to subtract my fractions, I get 2/6 minus 3/6. And that's going to give me a negative number, which sometimes that's okay, except 2 minus 1 is 1. I have room to borrow. I have room to borrow here. So I'm going to say 2, well that's like having 1 and 6/6 because 6/6 is 1. And I'm going to take that 6/6 and add it to my 2/6 to get 8/6. So now I have 1 and 8/6. Now I can do my subtraction. 8/6 minus 3/6 is 5/6. 1 minus 1 is 0. So I can see my answer is 5/6. So this is one way to deal with it. If you practice this enough, it will not seem all that hard. But if it's just too confusing, you know, the borrowing and all that sort of thing, you can always go to improper fractions. Convert these mixed numbers to improper fractions, find that denominator, common denominator, and subtract, just like we did before. So here we go. I'm starting with the original difference we need to find, 2 1/3 minus 1 1/2. I'm going to convert them into improper fractions. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. 7 over 3. 2 times 1 is 2. Plus 1 is 3. So 3 halves. Now I can't subtract because these are not the same denominator, so I'm going to convert them to 6. So 3 times 2 is 6, so 7 times 2 is 14. 2 times 3 is 6, so 3 times 3 is 9. So I've got 14/6 minus 9/6. I have a common denominator, so I just subtract my numerators. 14 minus 9 is 5, 5 over 6. So I get the same answer. So totally up to you which way you want to work it. I strongly suggest practicing. I have worksheets you could borrow from me if you want to. You can also always go to the internet. You go to Google, type in addition of fractions, subtraction of fractions, and you will find plenty to practice with. You will find that it won't take that many for you to do before this becomes very easy. So I hope you'll take that time to practice these and get really strong with them. Thanks again for listening.